In the wake of two deadly crashes involving its 737 MAX jets, Boeing faces dozens of lawsuits. In the past several months, we've gathered a steady flow of new information showing the company didn't tell pilots about the automated system that seems to have caused the crashes, that the recovery procedure designed to correct for a malfunction may not have been enough, that Boeing provided the FAA with bad information about how much control that system could have over the plane, and that the FAA didn't test the system. Now, almost 350 people are dead. 189 on Lion Air Flight 610, which crashed last October. 157 on Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, which crashed in March. Their families suing the plane maker. One of the lawyers representing victims' families is a man by the name of Kabateck. His clients are all Indonesian families. Their loved ones died on Lion Air 610. I sat down with Kabateck this weekend in Los Angeles. Kabateck accuses Boeing of withholding information about its jets and is trying to ensure his clients have a right to sue the company. Some Lion Air 610 families signed a form potentially releasing Lion Air of liability in exchange for compensation. Kabateck says he's working to ensure that release doesn't also apply to Boeing. Now, most of his clients never signed the form, and they're moving forward with a lawsuit. Kabateck filed that suit in Chicago, where Boeing is headquartered, just a couple of blocks from where I'm sitting now. But now Boeing is apparently going to try to move the case to Indonesia. Boeing says for the convenience of victims' families. A court has given the company until the middle of next month to declare its intent to move the case. Kabateck says Boeing is trying to escape a robust legal process here in the U.S. He says Indonesian courts oversee a drawn-out process and don't assign punitive damages. He explained.
I think it would probably benefit Boeing in three critical ways. One is I think that they're confident that the economic damages of the economic losses as well as the compensatory losses for the loss of a loved one are going to be kept low by a court in Indonesia. I think they feel rather confident that they'll be able to delay the case for a long period of time if it's in Indonesia, because the courts are apparently very slow, much slower than our courts, much slower than our judge, who has indicated that he wants to move the case along. And the final reason is really there's no punitive damages in Indonesia. And punitive damages aren't designed to compensate anybody. They're designed to punish the wrongdoer. And in this case, Boeing, we believe, should be subjected to punitive damages because of what they did in connection, or what they didn't do in connection with these aircraft.
Sunday, the day before I sat down with Kabateck, Boeing made an admission. It knew, over a year before Lion Air Flight 610 crashed, that an alert in the cockpit having to do with the sensors that apparently went awry wasn't working. In order to understand all of this, let me explain how the system that went wrong works. There are two sensors on the front of the 737 MAX. They are called angle of attack sensors, or AOA sensors for short. They measure the angle at which the nose of the plane is pointed into the sky. They send that information back to a computerized system called MCAS. If just one of those sensors says the pitch of the nose of the plane is too high, the MCAS will trigger using that horizontal stabilizer at the back and push the nose of the plane down. But if that sensor is wrong, the MCAS pushes the nose down anyway, and that causes a nosedive. That is what's suspected of happening on Lion Air 610 and Ethiopian 302, based on preliminary findings. Now, in an update to the MAX, Boeing says the MCAS will rely on readings from both of those sensors. If they disagree by a certain margin, MCAS will not trigger at all. But should the pilots know if those AOA sensors on the nose of the plane aren't reading the same information about how high the nose is pitched into the air? Boeing had indicated that if those sensors disagreed, a warning would pop up in the cockpit to tell pilots. That warning is called AOA disagree. Pretty self-explanatory, right? Again, Boeing indicated it was standard in all MAX jets. Well, Sunday, Boeing admitted it wasn't. It would only work if airlines had opted for another feature: angle of attack sensor information gauges, ones that tell the pilots what information those sensors are actually sending back to the computer. If airlines didn't add on that extra feature, the AOA disagree alert wouldn't work. Boeing knew that back in 2017 and didn't do anything about it. I read part of Boeing's statement to Brian during our interview Monday morning.
They could have done something to make the plane more safe, and they didn't, and then they tried to monetize that kind of safety through an upgrade, much like going to buy a car and whether you want the really good stereo speakers or the really bad stereo speakers. But it's not a stereo speaker. This is something that had to do with people's safety. They didn't advise about it. And then the ultimate fact that they knew about this in 2017, a year before my client's family members perished, is rather outrageous. So if it's found to be that was a substantial factor here, and that if that had been either advised or added as not an upgrade, that these people would be alive today, that's outrageous, and that's one of the reasons why there are punitive damages.
Boeing said on March 11th, the day after the Ethiopian crash, that their flight operations manual already outlines an existing procedure to safely handle the unlikely event of erroneous data coming from an AOA sensor. And they added that a pilot can always override the computer with electric or manual trim. Was that a misleading statement for them to make because they're talking about what the FOM says on March 11th, whereas the pilots on Lion Air Flight 610 might not have known about it?
Right, I think it is misleading. And I think it's misleading because we also know that both sets of pilots, at least from what we've heard from the voice recorder, were trying what they could to look in the manual and to figure out what to do with this problem, and they weren't able to readily find it.
But they already knew about runaway stabilizer, which is what's happening when the MCAS gets an erroneous AOA input and starts putting the nose of the plane down. Effectively, what the plane is doing is runaway stabilizer, and the pilots already know how to handle that. So why would they need sort of redundant instruction on how to handle that?
I mean, the question is, did they know? And did they know what they were doing? And did they know how to operate it based upon faulty information that they may have been given?
The movement of the plane, though, that's happening is something they're already trained on, right?
Right, but they're trained on it based upon the older version of the 737 before the MAX, the 800 before the MAX. And what we've heard, at least anecdotally, is that this evidence was, or this information was being given to them based upon the old aircraft, and it just didn't work based upon the new aircraft.
Dennis Muhlenberg has characterized the AOA problem, or the lack of information about what AOA sensors are doing, as not a safety issue. What's your reaction to that characterization?
There's probably 350 families that disagree with him.
They've also been lawyering up. They have this new created position. They've elevated their general counsel to a position that's just going to focus on these two crashes.
Retired federal district court or federal court of appeal judge, right? That's who they've taken and put into a very specific position to deal with these issues.
He's got a lot of legal credibility.
Yes, he does.
Does that concern you at all?
No, I'm not concerned because I think the justice system's fair, and I think that we have a fair opportunity to have our case heard. But it shows you the direction that Boeing's moving in, and this is the direction now of hunkering down and deciding that they're going to fight and deciding they're going to do everything they can to fight, which I think is kind of shameful because the initial conversation that came out of Boeing was, it looks like we made a mistake, it looks like we did some things wrong here, and we want to make it right. And now they've changed their tune and they're looking at this as, what defense can we build up? How can we send these cases to whether it be Ethiopia or Indonesia? And they're also one factor that they have to consider and people have to think about, which is these are obviously very substantial wrongful death claims. But what about the claims from Lion Air and from Ethiopia for the lost aircraft? What about the claims from every single one of these airlines? Take Southwest, for example, who I believe was their largest purchaser. What about their claims for aircraft sitting on a tarmac somewhere in Arizona that they can't fly? And who knows when they're going to be able to fly? This is going to be billions of dollars in claims. Forget the wrongful death cases. What about those cases? So you can see why they're circling the wagons.